Welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Clint Murphy. My goal is for each of us to grow personally, professionally, and financially, one conversation at a time. To do that, we will have conversations with subject matter experts across a variety of modalities. My job as your host will be to dig out those golden nuggets of wisdom that will facilitate our growth. Join me on this pursuit. If you've ever felt like your job description didn't adequately describe you, this conversation is for you. I talk with Sarabeth Berk about the concept of hybrid professionals who work at the intersection of multiple identities. We talk about how to discover your identities in hybridity and how to brand and market yourself. This was game-changing for me in identifying my hybrid identity and how I can create my own story. Enjoy our wide-ranging and deep conversation. Sarabeth, welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'd love to start with you on what's motivating you in life right now, and what are 2 or 3 things that you want to get across to our audience today in our conversation?
Oh, hi, Clint. It's great to be here. I am motivated right now by slowing down. I just took a Sprinter van road trip into the desert for about 10 days and was in solitude and connecting back to nature and brought watercolor paints. And so some creativity was coming up for me. And it just felt good to find that space to be alone and to be quiet and to slow down. It was great. And then I think you had a part 2. What do I want people to get from today?
What are some of the key things you want to get across to the listeners today?
I mean, I'm obsessed with my topic as this researcher of professional identity. And I really want people to understand what professional identity is first and foremost, because that's already sort of a hidden topic. And then I really would love to empower people to embrace being the inventor of their professional identity, like taking more onus and ownership over what they call themselves and how they show up in their work, because they are more than a job title. And I know that's the premise of what we'll get into, but it's a powerful statement.
Yeah, I've been reading the book to get ready for our conversation, and already in the last 2 days, I've had conversations about the topic with 2 different people. One of the people reaching out and saying, "Hey, I'm having some challenges in my life with work, etc. Can we chat about that?" And part of what I picked up was, well, you seem to be wanting to do all these things. Maybe here's the challenge. And I sent him a photo from one of the pages and said, this seems like, in the photo was, here, I'll pull it out.
Yeah, I'm curious.
It was right where I got to the page where what it was saying was when you would feel frustrated. So an emerging hybrid. When an emerging hybrid senses their hybridity, it's a time in their life when they're trying to discern how to apply all their talents together. They're usually frustrated or disheartened in their career. And it was exactly how he had started that message. He started talking about career drift. And then I said, well, can you tell me more? And it was, I'm getting frustrated at work. So I said, there might be an issue here. So let's then dive into that topic. So more than my title, the power of hybrid professionals in a workforce of experts and generalists. So Sarabeth, why don't we start with a broad overview of what a hybrid professional is and how we can, or examples of it, and then we'll dive into some of the details from the book.
I love it. We have a ton to unpack, so I'm thrilled to be here. So there's this issue that's going on in the workforce. I need to give a little bit of context before I give the definition. People are changing jobs a lot. It is not a linear career path model anymore. And as we change jobs, as we move roles, and also just as human beings, we have so many interests and our lifespan is increasing. So with that, it doesn't make sense for people to just have one identity in their work. And we've had this binary world of, are you an expert or are you a generalist? What do you fall into? And most people I talk to struggle to pick one. They're like, I'm a little bit of both. But if they fall into the generalist, then the issue is, well, what is your specialty? What do you focus on? And a lot of people are like, but I have many things I'm good at. And so we've got this paradox, this contrast, a contradiction of how can you be multiple things? when the world wants to understand you as one because you're confusing otherwise. So the definition I have for a hybrid professional, and really I see it as a type of identity, so I call it a hybrid professional identity, is when someone wears many hats and they work at the intersection of those different hats in their work, then they are hybridizing. The intersection is where their unique value lies. And hybrid professionals, until this point, have not known that they're allowed to hybridize. We've said you have to compartmentalize or list all the things you do, and it just doesn't work anymore. Everybody sounds like a jack of all trades, therefore nobody is. So the hybridity is sort of the new emerging factor of an identity we've been missing in the workforce.
A big part that we're going to focus on is that intersectionality, because it's when we're working from there that we're at our most powerful, from what I understood from the book. And it really starts to resonate with some different concepts that I've talked about with people over time. So we'll dive into that. And so then there's different ways we've been describing this over time, right? And you felt like there was pain to some of those. And for example, the T-shaped professional or the comb-shaped professional, that was a new one.
Yeah.
And expert generalists. Why are those some of the terms that have been used in the past, but you don't think they fit today? And why is hybrid professional the right one?
Yeah. So I'll paint the picture of the bigger theory and framework that I really see in the workforce. It goes back to this idea of expert generalist. So essentially, if you only have one professional identity, I call that singularity, because a lot of people do just believe like, I'm an engineer or I only do copywriting, and that's fine. We need people that are just one thing. Singularity is the first type. Then the next type is multiplicity. And this is the group of identity that gets the most language that we've been trying to, there's a ton of synonyms for it. So someone that's a polymath or a Renaissance man or a jack of all trades, a multi-hyphenate, multi-passionate, multi-dimensional, anything with multi in front of it. I've literally found 30 different terms for people that wear many hats or have many identities, and that's just multiplicity. So then what's missing on the spectrum, again, to break out of the binary of either or, moving into the space of both and, is when you think about a Venn diagram. So instead of just wearing one hat at a time, something you're wearing all of those hats simultaneously. The Venn diagram has the intersection between the 3 or 4 circles. So that is a hybrid space that is combining the other parts. The hybrid professional identity is what we've been needing language around because the integration point is different than the separation. Multiplicity, things don't touch. You're one at a time. It's either or. Hybridity is combination. It's marriage. It's where things get really messy and we literally don't have language of what do you call yourself when you're at that intersection. And that's what I specialize in now, is helping people realize and see their hybrid professional identity and then naming it, because whatever you call yourself in that intersection is your unique professional identity. It's truly you in your work, and you didn't know you get to name it. It's like a whole new level of your work.
And so an example of multiplicity, if I think about what I do for work during the day, right, as a CFO, sometimes I'm working on capital, other times I'm working on tax, other times I'm working on accounting or IT. But when I'm working on one of those things, I'm working on that thing. I'm not approaching that thing with a lens that combines all of them into one thing.
100%. So we have hybrid professionals amongst us that we have not been calling out. And to your point, I'll give a couple examples. There are biz dev ops teams in companies now. There's research ops, there's app ops, there's all kinds of combination teams. Well, we need professionals that represent a biz dev ops identity to be the director of that team or to be in a role on that team because they understand the 3 types of things that are coming together to a convergence. Another example is a biogeochemical engineer. That's a whole new field of engineering. And it took biology, geology, and chemistry or chemical engineering and combined that into something new. So this hybridization is happening. The terms I gave you are the most obvious because they literally joined 3 words into one. But sometimes it could be more subtle, like a social media influencer. 10 years ago, we didn't know what social media influencers were. We didn't have a term for that. People were taking selfies and writing content and pushing things online. And we were like, what is that person doing? Over time, we named a new name for that intersection of things. And that identity of a social media influencer now is pretty normal and commonplace. So hybridity at first is so out there, we don't know what to call it. We're like, this person's strange. And then over time, maybe some language starts to come through. And after a while, it becomes commonly used. And then we all know what it is. And it's not necessarily hybrid anymore because it's become normal. So it comes in these flows of new things that were divergent coming together to something that is a new emergence.
Now, so we name new things, and this raises a fun challenge. And so we'll jump forward in the book and then we'll come backwards on some of it. But one of the things you talk about, and it's so true, is when you are doing all of these things, and then you're at a cocktail party and someone says, what do you do? Why is that such a hard question for a hybrid to answer? And there's a concept you mentioned called thin slicing. How does that tie into it?
Oh my gosh. Well, can I turn the tables for a second and pretend we're at a networking party and I meet you and I say, hey, Clint, what do you do? How do you answer that?
Well, now what I would say is, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Clint. I'm a hybrid professional and I call myself a growth guide. I use writing, public speaking, podcasting, and coaching to help people grow personally, professionally, and financially. And I want to help 1 billion people do that.
Oh my gosh. I'm in shock and awe right now because you literally used my elevator pitch tool and it sounded so good.
I did.
Oh my gosh. That is a moment for the ages right there. Thank you.
You're welcome. I wouldn't have used that a week ago. So that's going in some bios. And
yeah,
when I go on a podcast and they're like, hey, can you send me a quick bio? I'll say, you bet I can. Right over to them.
So the follow-up question I ask people that I'm coaching is, how did that feel to say that? Like, usually you have a somatic response in your body if it clicks or doesn't.
Yeah, and that was key for me. And part of it is I'm going through a bit of a branding exercise. Obviously, by day, I'm a CFO, and at night, I work on all these other things. And I've been thinking of rebranding the podcast, the website, my Twitter account. And it just so happened that finding the website, thegrowthguide.guide, and then I just kept coming back to it. And thinking, because I'd always said, I want to help people personally, professionally, and financially grow. That had always been there. But to your point, like, it just kept coming back to that name and saying, that is what I do. Like, I want to guide people on their growth. And, that combines my CFO background, real estate investing, meditation, teaching, shadow work teaching, men's work facilitation. Like, it combines everything I've ever done into 3 words. Growth guide, or 2 words, growth guide. So to your point, it just really resonates to the core. And what reading about it did was it gave me permission to say, wait, I'm not just an oddball who wants to do these 6 or 7 things. And everyone's like, well, you said you're going to retire. And I said, well, I'll stop working a 9 to 5 and I'll pivot to doing these 6 or 7 things. But they're all built around that central thesis that really resonates with my core. That was a really long answer to that, but does that make sense, Sarabeth?
I mean, you said it so eloquently. It's as if we planted you and we had done this whole rehearsal ahead of time, which we didn't. It's exactly what people experience. I couldn't have said it better. When you find your hybrid title, which is the name for your hybrid professional identity, it truly represents who you are. It's your truest professional self, and it marries together the best and brightest identities in your work. It's not all of your professional identities. I want to be really clear with people. You are not throwing every ingredient into the kitchen and making a stew. Like, you are picking the best ingredients that you use in your work and then saying, who am I? When those things are fusing and firing and working together, and calling yourself a growth guide, I mean, I can see you light up, and that is part of what it does for you because you're energized by it. You feel like this is me, and this is the name I've been wanting to find to call myself, and now you have it. So I'm thrilled because that just was like a live demo, which is a really unique thing to do on a podcast.
I usually like to do those. It's my favorite part of having the podcast is I get to read the books and have conversations with the authors, and it's almost like going to book club, but you're actually talking to the person that wrote it, which is better than talking to Ted or Tina who just happens to be in your book club with you. I had read it, so I understood how to create the job title. How does someone who's listening, how did they create that job title?
Yeah, let's break it down and rewind a bit. You're a very sophisticated reader and student, because I do think some people can go through the book more than my title and have this transformational experience alone. But I also made an accompanying workbook because people need the tools and the steps. So the main book is sort of the overview of what is a hybrid professional and stories, examples, etc. But the workbook is a 5-step process that I learned both by doing it myself. Like, I went through many professional identity crises. Nobody told me that's what it was. They said I was burned out. They said I needed to focus. They said I had to choose one career path, all of those things we get told. But I really just was struggling with who the heck am I and how do I answer? What do you do? So essentially the 5-step process goes like this. Step 1 is just kind of getting a baseline, like naming what you currently do. Are you aware of yourself right now? And taking a little bit of inventory. Step 2 is digging deeper. You want to expand and open up. Well, what are all the professional identities you have? Have you ever made a list of those? And by the way, skills are different than identities. Like, some people don't even realize that. They're like, yeah, I do marketing, I do sales. Okay, those are actions. Who are you when you do marketing? And they go, huh? And you may not call yourself a marketer. The identity you might be when you do marketing is storyteller or navigator or pathfinder. Like, there's words you may not even realize you should use. So we do this deep dive into all of your professional identities. Then we narrow it down to the ones I call are your primary professional identities. Primary are different than non-primary. The primary identities in your work are the ones you use the most. They light you up. They give you that sense of joy. They're usually your greatest areas of expertise. And you want to be known for these. These are like your must-have professional identities that must be in a job description. If someone told me, for instance, one of my primary professional identities is being an artist, if they said, Sarabeth, you can't use that identity in this job, it's like part of me gets shut off, or, I am minimized. So we go through those exercises. And then step 3 is investigating the intersections, where we draw a Venn diagram. You have to have at least 2 primary professional identities to make one intersection, because that's 2 circles of a Venn diagram. And 4 primary professional identities is the upper limit. So it's mostly because there's too much complexity. And so if you've got more than 4 primary professional identities, you need to keep narrowing down. Then the next step is the trickiest. It's where we actually say, who are you at the intersection of your identities? And this is a very unconscious thing that we just do, and we take it for granted. It's unknown to us. It's kind of invisible. And so we have to do guided visualization and work on memories and look at your work products and isolate these micro details and things you do that are examples of your hybridity in action. When we can isolate a few of these, we need a couple so that we can look for patterns and trends of what common things are happening that you didn't realize. And usually interesting words will show up. Like this one guy said, I noticed that I look at teams like a chessboard and I move the pieces around and I'm managing the tension. Well, right away, those terms chessboard and tension are really different keywords he used about himself that were different than being a project manager and, a product developer. And so eventually the keywords are what help you see who you really are in the intersection. And returning to the example I just gave, his hybrid title became tension methodologist. So the final step, though, is the most interesting one because it's owning it. It's stepping into this confidence of being able to walk into the world and call yourself this title and use it and feel ownership of it. And the confidence piece is usually what takes people a little bit to practice and iterate until it kind of sticks. There's usually some aha moment where people are sharing their hybrid title and they see the reaction from, a colleague or someone in their life. And the other person's like, that's amazing. I get you. And that reinforces you have found your hybrid title. Like, you know who you are and you have finally figured out this is how I walk in the world. So that's a little bit of the process. And I do that, through courses and coaching and things, because having a mirror and collaborating, it's all kind of a vocabulary word game, getting people to use words they're not comfortable with, like idea architect. People are like, well, I'm not an architect. And it's like, but you can use a word from a different field in a special way that means something different to you. So of course you can become an idea architect. So you have to break those mental blocks, which is why doing it alone is great, but doing it in a collaborative course or something is so much better.
We do it alone, we may have the tendency to limit ourselves or not go deep enough or far enough or strong enough. So one of the things that really resonated, you were talking about primary identities. If someone's done, as an example, the Clifton Strength Finder, and you look at your top 4 strengths or your top 5 strengths, how often would you see those top strengths play into someone's identities?
It's interesting. I think all of these assessment tools, because I've heard you talk about those in your other podcasts, are great parts of the evidence of learning who you are, whether it's Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or strengths. And yet, what is the identity when you have those strengths or when you use that Enneagram? You still need to know the noun. And what's interesting is you and I, Clint, might have a lot of the same skills. We might even be the same Enneagram, but that doesn't mean we call ourselves the same thing. So those assessments give you clues about your personality, clues about how you operate, but ultimately there is a name for what you do that only you know, and that's why you're unique. The beauty of naming your hybrid professional identity is that it helps you differentiate yourself. There's this theory by Marilyn Brewer called optimal distinctiveness. And that's what we're going for. We're trying to find a name for you where you stand in and stand out and fit in simultaneously. So that optimal distinctiveness helps people resonate like, wow, you're a growth guide. That's so cool. I've never met one before. It's not a name that you gave yourself that's so esoteric. People are like, what the heck is he talking about? I don't get it, right? So you're giving us enough of a hint of like, I get you, but yet I've never met someone like that. And that's the perfect sweet spot.
And something that jumped out at me, and I'm wondering about it now, in your research as you were coming across it, and you look at people who fall into singularity versus multiplicity versus hybridity, is there any tie-in to what may be construed in medical terms? ADHD is an example. If and I'll share that I'm reasonably certain based on a diagnosis as an adult and behaviors that I was diagnosed with it, am I more likely to also search out hybridity just to have that variety of pace and change in learning than someone else would?
Oh, I love this. You're stretching me a little bit. I haven't done a direct analysis of ADHD and hybrid professional identity, so I'm just going to think through this out loud. My sense is that multiplicity and hybridity get confused a lot, and not everyone becomes a hybrid professional or evolves into hybrid professional identity. It is a more sophisticated and more complex way of working. So if someone has ADD or ADHD, just because they're interested in many things and keep changing gears and pick up a lot of different skills or interests, that does not automatically mean they're going to be in hybridity. Because hybridity is the relationship between things. So if I'm doing financial analysis 1 minute, and then over here I'm doing a podcast the next, they might have no connection to each other, right? And the hybridity is where maybe not only is the topic of the podcast around financial analysis, but it's the way that you show up as bringing the financial identity into the podcast identity, and they're playing off of each other. And you've got a whole different way of doing a podcast. Like that would be the hybridity because it's an interdisciplinary, integrated space. And so unless there is connection, then there is no hybridity.
So there has to be that ADHD may get them and we often talk in finance and I guess now testing with our kids, they use the terms depth and breadth. So that ADHD may get them breadth of experience, but unless they also have that discipline or that mindset that says, let me take this depth of experience and let me mold it all into, instead of being, the shape of that comb, let me twist it into a ball, so I tie it all together. So now I'm not those different things at different points in time. I just make all of that my identity combined. Then they're not going the full hybridity route.
Yeah, I think so. Let me give a different illustration. I don't always talk about this one because it's a little funny, but why not? We're going to just be crazy for a second. Think about prefixes of words, and I'm going to use a few words in a row, and then I'm going to give an example of food to play off of this. So when we talk about words like cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, these words mean really different things. So intradisciplinary is where I'm going to start first. Intradisciplinary means one discipline. So if we think about food, it's like carrots on a plate, just one item. Then we usually talk about cross-disciplinary, and cross just means one side sees the other. So we might have carrots and cucumbers on a plate. They just notice each other. The next level is multidisciplinary, many disciplines. So it might be a salad. So you've got the lettuce, the tomato, the carrots, the cucumber. They're diced up, but they're all still distinguishable. Nothing is really mixed. You can see all the parts. They're just on top of each other. Then we move to a whole different level, which is interdisciplinary, between. Inter means between. Suddenly, this is where a stew is created. So the carrots and the cucumber and onion are creating a whole new flavor that's bigger. It's like bigger than the sum of the parts. And the level beyond that is transdisciplinary, which is beyond. So suddenly we don't have salad or a stew, we have a cake. An entirely different thing has been created that looks nothing like what started. And it's beyond the parts. So this is how I see identity, professional identity, and hybrid identity coming through, where singularity or experts are in that intradisciplinary. They are just one lane focused. And someone who's cross-disciplinary or multidisciplinary is in the multiplicity of professional identities. But hybrid professionals are in interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary ways of being. They have literally become a whole new type of thinker and professional identity in the workplace. They tend to be silo busters and translators and bridges and misfits. Like there's some weird terms. They're integrators. And we need those people in companies because they're working between the silos and being like, hey, our customer base is frustrated with our product and we need to do this marketing better. And what if we connect the dots in this way? And nobody else saw that because they didn't speak those three languages or have that interconnected ability. So all three types of these professional identity, the singularity, multiplicity, hybridity, are all important in their own way. It's not like one is better than the other. In fact, if we were to have a meeting, and in that meeting we only had people in singularity or multiplicity, the meeting would not be as effective. And this is a little of a theoretical model. I haven't totally studied this in practice yet. But you can hypothesize that, the experts are like just in their lane, and people in multiplicity know a little bit of a lot of things, or they might know a lot about a lot of things, but they're not connecting the dots well. But the hybrid professional at that table would be able to say, hey, Joe, what if we connect with that? Like they find more fusion and synergy. And that's a critical part that often gets missed. And not everyone plays that part as well as they think they do. It's like you can tell when it sort of stalls and when people are still just jumping from one thing to the next and not finding synergy.
And is that, let's put yourself in that meeting, is that often that person who says, hey, throw me the whiteboard pen. I'm hearing something and I'm getting a picture and I want to weave together what all four of you at the table are saying in a way that diagrammatically we can all understand. Because you often have the one or two people at the table or three, and they're kind of looking at what everybody's saying and they've got that perplexed look on their face until that person who's a bit of a hybrid professional gets up there and says, I just heard this from 5 different teams, draws a simple diagram, and you're all like, oh, yeah, wow, you really boiled that down.
Yes. The sense making is definitely a quality of a hybrid professional. That chameleon, the ability to walk in different shoes and understand different sides of an equation, those are absolutely qualities of hybrid professionals. And we don't call them out for that. We're just like, oh, this person's great. So coming full circle back to where we started a moment ago about depth versus breadth, you can have depth about a lot of things or breadth about a lot of things, but the T-shape, the depth and breadth, does not automatically mean hybridity. It does not always mean integration. It's sort of hinting at it, but that theory sort of falls short of finishing the idea of saying, when we look for depth and breadth, we're looking for integration. They don't say that.
So we jumped ahead through a lot of things there. Now, if we go backwards, early in the book, you have a wonderful quote from Frank Nagel that says, having more diversified knowledge and being a jack of all trades actually allows you to master knowledge that is farther away from your expertise in ways that can be beneficial, that can have important impacts on the future of science, the future of ideas and innovations for companies. I thought that was very powerful. And can you share with the listeners why that allows you to add so much to each of those areas that he's mentioning?
Yeah, I think it plays off of something I've created since I wrote the book, which is how hybrid are you? Because I sort of have gotten some pushback. People have challenged me, which I love, that Sarabeth, aren't we all hybrid professionals? Isn't everyone using a lot of identities simultaneously? And it's like a yes and no answer. Like, as human beings, we are hybrids. We have come from different countries and nationalities, and our ancestors, like, we've been combining multiple identities over time for ages. That makes you, and me. And there's a lot of research on hybrid culture. But what we haven't talked about is hybridity just within the professional side of our lives. We've been really stuck in that binary. And so when I thought about, okay, is everyone a hybrid? The answer is no. You're really only hybrid if you think you are. And even then, you still have to show evidence of it. You can't just claim it and then not be able to explain it. And so this framework of how hybrid are you is about 6 or 7 criteria. Things like, how many different professional identities do you have? Do you have 2 or do you have 4 of the primary ones? How divergent are those professional identities? So if I'm an author, speaker, writer, those are all kind of similar, right? They're all about language, communication, speaking. So my hybridity, if those are my 3 primary ones, would be lower. But someone who's an artist, neuroscientist, and software engineer, which exists in today's world, those are 3 very disparate identities fusing together in that person. So the more divergence, the more hybridity. Other parts of it are, how much time do you spend in your intersection? Because just because you're a hybrid professional doesn't mean you're in your hybrid professional identity all the time. That's sort of the dream, to find the intersection and use it because it's like flow state and it feels really good. But we move and shift. Like, sometimes I just need to be a researcher and I'm going to write and do research. And sometimes I want to be an artist. And then sometimes the hybridity comes through. So it's sort of like a fluidity of moving through those spaces. So anyway, so this framework of how hybrid are you, I think helps answer that quote, that the more disparate the identities are that you're bringing together, the more you're enriching and literally finding a space of innovation within you, that a whole new thing is coming into existence that never existed before, which is why most people struggle to describe themselves, explain their value, feel engaged in work, find where they belong. Those are all symptoms of a hybrid professional navigating the workforce, because they don't understand their own hybridity. Therefore, others don't. And therefore, there's a lot of breakdown and career frustration. Until somebody can really come into themselves and have this awareness of why their different professional identities play together and what value is created at that intersection, the moment they can communicate that into the world to managers, to clients, they differentiate themselves because their unique value prop is clear.
And so I'm asking a question for a friend. Let's say you find that hybridity for you, right? And you find that path, but you don't pursue it, right? You keep doing what you were already doing, which may be totally different. Does the level of dissatisfaction that person's going to feel on a daily basis, does it just grow and magnify?
I want to talk to this friend so bad right now. I mean, all of this is contextual, so I'm just going with what I've heard. From my own personal experience and the people I've worked with, when they have compartmentalized themselves, meaning they've just become the one identity they need to be for that job, or they make themselves fit whatever that job is, but they realize their full self isn't showing up. They're not able to play in the hybridity of them. They are going to suffer. They are going to feel that they're being drained, and it just really feels like you are disconnecting from really critical parts of yourself. And so I have seen People can stay in those roles for as long as they want, but the level of life satisfaction and fulfillment and interest in the job definitely diminishes. And yet, the flip side is when that person has the courage to stand in their hybrid professional identity, to talk about themselves more publicly, like to advocate of like, this is like to do that elevator pitch you did a while back and to say that during interviews and to put that out there in their network, they will find a job that links and cherishes and wants that person because of their hybridity, because that's the unique thing that company has been looking for. So it's a hard transition because it takes that bravery, and yet it's possible to find jobs that are the right hybrid fit for you.
You almost speak it into existence, if you will.
It's a funny thing. The best way I can explain it, because you can't just search for job titles anymore. Like job titles don't mean the same things. Like words are being used all over the place. Like head of growth at one company is totally different than another. So it's almost like once you know the qualities you possess that define your hybrid professional identity, you're searching for those qualities within a job description. And that might lead you to a job title you never would have envisioned yourself doing. One time I was searching for a new job for myself, and I ended up finding a public relations and community outreach position. I've never searched for a public relations job in my life. And yet, based on the description and the qualities they needed, my hybridity would have been perfect in that role.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you're making me think as well, the last guest we just released an episode of, his title by the time he was done at the company he was at was head of mindfulness and compassion. And when in the last 20 years, and this is a public company, very large, and head of mindfulness and compassion, and you just think of that and say, that is someone who created their title to fit their hybrid personality in the workplace they were in. Because before that, I believe it was more of a marketing operations role.
That's exactly how this works. That's a beautiful example. Even big companies, because a lot of people say, Sarabeth, companies don't understand this. How do you do this in a large organization? That person invented a role and named themselves a new job title, which perfectly fit their hybrid professional identity. So it's absolutely possible.
I love that. And so we've already talked about that part. And there are 5 attributes that you talk about that are common to hybrids. And is that something we can dive into? And I have a list of them.
Yes, I just would love you to share them first, so I'm tracking with you.
Love trying out new combinations. Possess rarity or onlyness. Words fail to describe them. They have their own process and style of doing things. And they see this one really resonated with me. It ties even to our whiteboarding example, actually. They see connections and patterns that others don't.
Those are some of the big themes to give people some clues of what's happening in your hybridity in action. It really is so unknown to us. Who am I in the intersection of my multiple professional identities? So those clues of recognizing patterns, seeing things other people don't see, making connections, but that's just the beginning. That's the tip of the iceberg. Then I work with people to say, how are you making those connections? What types of connections are you making? Because people start really high level in this work when they start the self-reflection process. I'll say, tell me about what you do that, lights you up and you feel your best. And we go through these special ways of accessing memories and moments. And a lot of people say, oh, I'm amazing at problem solving. And I go, great. Everyone says that. What kinds of problems do you solve and how do you solve them? And let's get into the hybridity of how you're solving them. Other people say, I love making connections between people. I'm an excellent introducer. Okay, a lot of people are great at relationship building, but what makes you so special? It's the specificity we have to get into. So those 5 qualities are just a way to kind of acknowledge, do I create processes that other people haven't invented? And then you need to look and say, well, what have I done? One tool I use is called first, best, and only. So if you think about it, where were you the first in your work? Whether it was the first time you landed a client or the first new product you helped launch, any kind of first. It could be on a team, in a company, in a region. You can set the level of that. First is one clue. Best could be, the top 5, top 10, top 20, again, in your company, in your city, whatever. And the only is you are the only person to do X, Y, or Z, to land a new partnership or to design a special handout. When you can use those terms, first, best, and only, it helps you find these specific memories because first, best, and only are pretty much synonyms for uniqueness. If you're doing something where you're the first, best, or only, that is something you can do that other people can't do or can't do as well as you can. So you need to highlight and realize that about yourself. When you find these work examples or products or moments, then you can realize what were you doing to create that new partnership or that first product. Did you, start with online research? Did you talk to people? Like, we have to get past these generalizations of how we do our work and get very, very tight and clear. And that's why I do a lot of this like meta awareness and observation, helping people get outside of themselves and seeing who they really are and how they do what they do. Most of us are completely blind. And that's why we fall back on really generic language. Oh, when I did that process, I was standing at the whiteboard problem solving. Okay, how are you problem solving? Oh, well, I asked some questions. How did you ask the questions? And like you dig and dig and dig and you realize this person always is inquisitive. They always start a question with, how might we? Like you find these patterns that are inside of them that they never stopped to see before. And that's where the emergent, the hybrid professional identity comes out.
So you may even take it as far to say, when I hear someone talking and we're talking about anything that has to do with numbers, I actually see in my mind the Excel models and the workbooks, and I'm creating a balance sheet or an income statement or an org chart visually in my head. So that I'm thinking, okay, how are the pieces moving and creating that? So that's taking it a step further than just saying, I solve problems. It's, well, how do you do it? Well, I see patterns visually in the air, in my mind, while you're talking.
Yeah, what caught me is when you said you visualize pieces. Like I would never think about math as pieces and I would not visualize it. So already those are qualities I would want to explore and I'd be writing down those words. I call it your gold mine keyword bank. I come up with these like gold mine words and we come back to them because the gold mine is where the juice of your hybrid professional identity lives. It's a vocabulary list that is you at your core. And these words are not the words you're going to find on another assessment. They're words that come out of you that you say about yourself in a way you don't hear it.
So how do we know when we've started to find our stride, when we're really getting it and we're on the right path? How are we going to know that?
So good. I love the way you frame that. So as you probably saw in my book, there's a spectrum of development from emerging hybrid to established. So a lot of people who have been using, I'm a jack of all trades, I wear a lot of hats, they've just been saying that language forever because they don't know what else to say about themselves. And they're feeling frustrated and they're like jumping back and forth between identities, as you mentioned way in the beginning about your friend. That's a moment of emergent hybridity. They're sensing there's something else going on and they don't know what it is. So in that early stage, that's usually when I meet people because they're in some transition or deficit or just frustration in their career. And first of all, it's having this awareness, like literally the question of like, well, what is your professional identity and how do you see yourself? There's actually 4 questions I use to help outline your professional identity. And they go like this. It's an internal, external set and then a conscious, unconscious set. So first of all, ask other people, how do you see me in my work? What identity do you think I have in my work? Interview people for that external validation because they might say really interesting things. People might call you, oh, you're the team therapist. You're always listening to our problems and you give great advice. Like team therapist, would you have called yourself that? That's an identity. So you start that work. Then the internal side of that is, how do I see myself in my work? What do I call myself? Then the unconscious part is, who am I when I'm in my flow at work? What do I call myself then? So maybe, Clint, you hit your flow when you're creating these spreadsheets. Well, who are you in that moment? Are you, a number designer? Like, is there some other identity there? And then the other side is the conscious side. Who am I in my greatest areas of expertise? Like, what do I want to be known for? So when you ask yourself those 4 areas and you map the answers to the questions, you see patterns and you see professional identities that are showing up that are consistent. So that's sort of the beginning of understanding yourself and opening your self-awareness before you can understand your hybridity. Getting into the established hybridity is taking the ownership. Like when I realized I'm a creative disruptor, I haven't even mentioned that yet. So my hybrid title is Creative Disruptor because I work at the intersection of being an artist, educator, researcher, and designer. And it took me years to figure all this out, mostly because no one else had a framework or tool, and it was all just self-education. And when I finally started talking about myself as a hybrid professional or using the term creative disruptor, it helped me advocate for myself. And I started feeling, yeah, this is how I want to be known. This is a better way of summarizing me. And I could feel and see moments in my work where the creative disruptor was active and being activated. So over time, other people started calling me that too. Over time, I started having more control of being in my hybridity versus it being ad hoc or sort of like random. So moving into your established hybrid professional identity is about having more control over it, having more confidence in it, and finding just the beauty of like the fulfillment that you know who you are. And it's not changing all the time based on the new job title you got or the new person you met. That's a little bit of what this looks like over time. And that consistency helps people understand you. So even if you have 10 jobs on your resume and you look like a job hopper or you've changed industries 3 times and people are like, I don't get what you're doing in your career. Like, what are your goals? I've been an art teacher. I've been a program director in nonprofits. I've run an innovation entrepreneurship program. Like my background is crazy scattered if you look at it on paper. But I can go back now and say, actually, for 15 years, I've been a creative disruptor and didn't know how to describe it 15 years ago. But each of those positions, I could now look and call out moments of the creative disruptor inside of me. She just wasn't, she wasn't named yet. I wasn't aware of her. So it brings clarity and it brings a common thread, and it honestly helps you feel you have a narrative of who you are and how that connects to the work you do.
And so one of the things that was great in there is you're looking at it and saying, how do I see myself? And you're also asking people external to you, how do you see me? Because one of the challenges I find with personal development is, and if you're addicted to learning, you're constantly evolving. And so you run that challenge of, I know I'm evolving, and so I see myself as Clint 17.0, but I reach out to people and they still, my friends who've known me for 20 years, they still see you as Clint 2.0. And so how do you reconcile that mismatch between how you see yourself versus the perception other people have of you?
It's a great part of this process and a challenging one, because what I do is I'm literally creating a new field. And this field that I'm working in is connecting identity studies and human development with career development and personal branding. And so we're leaning a little bit more into the branding side of the work. Right now, I see these 3 things as being pretty isolated. Most people don't connect those 3 areas of studies together, and yet I think they're deeply intertwined. When we talk about human development, we're talking about identity development. Our identities are evolving and changing as we grow and age and gain wisdom and experience. But over here in the career development world, they're still talking about what's your major, what's your credential, how do you upskill, what are your goals, pick one thing. And then the personal branding side is, how do you put yourself into the world? So when there's that mismatch of I see myself one way and other people see myself a different way, that might mean that you're in a transition. So that's good awareness of like, why is there a disconnect? It's always like stop and pause and question like, what's going on here? Why aren't we seeing me the same way I see me? And then if you are going through a transition, it's an opportunity to educate, to build new awareness to your audience, to your friends, to whoever of actually what I've realized is I'm a creative disruptor, because even though you've known me as an artist or you knew me when I was an educator, all of those parts of me are actually part of a bigger picture of this hybrid professional identity where I've been a creative disruptor that entire time and didn't know it. And now it makes sense. And now that's the term I'm using to connect all these dots that didn't connect before. So that can help them sort of catch up to you or digest and understand you better. I really have this belief, Clint, that When you are able to see yourself in your work and clearly articulate that to other people, then your why becomes clear and your value becomes visible. So I'm sure you've heard a lot about like what's your purpose and what's your passion. I think the missing part of that is what's your identity when you know your passion and your purpose. So it's like the thing that unlocks everything in my mind, because we've talked in so many career circles of like, know your why and know what you're going after, but who are you is still what you call yourself when you're following that why.
Now that takes us down a segue, which I love, because one of the challenges I see with a lot of young people who I have conversations with, and you start to talk career and life and goals, and it seems what's missing for a lot of them is purpose, right? I don't know why I'm here. I don't have goals around it. I don't know what my long-term path is. So as we, and maybe it works one way or it works the other way, is if I know my purpose, does my hybridity fall out of that? Or does my hybridity help shape what that purpose is?
My belief is it works both ways. People that have a clear sense of their purpose, their why, then probably can lean into what do I call myself? And people like me, when I found I'm a creative disruptor, then I was like, oh, that's why I've been driving people crazy and pushing buttons and people are telling me I'm challenging them too much. Like it all makes sense. It snapped into focus. I also want to lean on the Ikigai framework because I know you are familiar with that and a lot of people mention it. Ikigai is, what I'm good at, what the world needs, what I can get paid for, what I love to do. And the bigger circle that's missing around Ikigai is who are you when you know all that? It's the identity. It's literally the missing link out of that. Also, just a tangent story. I was working with a woman recently who was a UX designer. That was her formal job title. She was really stuck in that role. She didn't have a lot of upward mobility. Her manager kind of undervalued her. She's like, I know I'm more than just a UX designer. So we did my strategy and process. We figured out her primary professional identities. And the hybrid title that emerged for her is curator of purposeful experiences. That's a really different way to frame her than just UX designer. And to talk about purpose and how this all connects, she just started her first side business and she's calling it purposefully curated. So because she discovered her hybrid professional identity, she was able to name her business and they play off of each other. And it's sort of like the business is a bigger picture or another side of her hybrid professional identity. And I thought that was really genius. I've seen a couple other people do something like that too. And you're kind of mentioning it too with the growth guide, right? So playing with that as a direction as well as an identity for you.
And purposely curated. I mean, just the sound of that is so... It invokes, I want to go see her website and see what she's curating and putting together. That's great. Now, so we talked a little bit earlier about the concept of emerging hybrids, right? And so let's say I'm listening to this and I realize, hey, wait, that's me. I'm an emerging hybrid, but I want to be a full hybrid. What are the steps I take to go from A to B? Like, what are those? You mentioned critical factors, right? What are the critical factors that are there and how do I use those to become that?
You know what? I don't think I've ever really explained this before. And it's making me think of the growth work you do because it's a growth process and everyone's growth is at a different rate. And it really has to do with when your understanding sinks in and when you feel and mature. And so one of the frameworks in the book that kind of plays off of this shifting your sense of yourself, it's called Keegan's Orders of Consciousness, the evolution of self. And he has 5 orders of consciousness. And so the first 1 and 2 happen when we're adolescents and young. But usually by the 3rd order, we see ourselves the way the world sees us. So I am who you think I am. And people just kind of stop there and they accept that. And it's kind of a bell curve. So the majority of people see their identity the way the world taught them it is. But the 4th and 5th orders, people, if they get to them, shift into, maybe after their 30s or so. So there's like an age and maturity factor in here. The 4th order is where you start to feel more self-authorship. You're like, wait a second, I have some control over myself and I can be who I want to be. And by the 5th order, this is really fancy systems thinking and systems of system thinking. You're like, oh my gosh, I can create who I am within the world and I can break rules and understand how to play by them. Like it's complete autonomy for you to be who you want to be no matter what. And you understand it. It's a consciousness evolution. So I do believe part of going from being an emerging hybrid professional to established is going through some of that developmental self-awareness and meta-awareness, like really shifting your consciousness of yourself.
And so by the time you're getting to that stage 5, you're almost looking at the world and saying, yeah, maybe we're not in a matrix. And maybe we are, because there's so many things that if you look at them in, sometimes, for example, I'll take real estate investing and I'll say to someone, well, it's actually really easy to become a billionaire. And they say, well, what are you talking about? That's crazy. And you say, well, no, you just need to buy $1 billion of assets and you can have 800 million in debt. And 25 years later, the debt's gone and the assets are worth $2 billion from appreciation. And you say that to the average person and they just look at you like you're crazy. But you just think, well, no, that's how so many people started. They just kept buying assets. So you almost see that system and say, well, I can do that. I just have to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and do that for everything, right? Oh, I want to become a writer. I just have to take writing classes, right? Where there's almost an element, you talked about growth. There's almost an element there of growth mindset, where if you have a fixed mindset, you probably stop at stage 3, right? I graduated high school or university. I never have to read a book again. I'm done. I just go to my 9 to 5, go home and watch some Netflix.
Right. And I'm done. And this to me, I'm getting nerdy now, is where the identity research comes back in. There's a lot out there about identity goes in a spiral, and we go through periods of these cycles called moratorium achievement. What that means is it's very normal to go through a period where you're exploring and you're trying to figure yourself out. And then you come to some conclusion and you achieve your next identity. Although some people go through identity foreclosure. That means they've committed to an identity just because they think that's all they can be or will be. They've foreclosed. So that's a little bit of a fixed mindset. So there's a lot of great language already out there about human identity development that I think really applies to professional identity development. And I'm excited to help open the vocabulary of us, because we are in a day and age where workers need to understand new growth models of their professional self. In fact, Clint, you're going to love this. When I do webinars and presentations, the first question I use to warm up the room is, what is your professional identity? Put it in the chat or turn to your partner or whatever, and I give people a moment to answer just off the top of their head. Because it's like a little research moment. Most of the time, I'd say like 90% of the time, people answer with, I am working in product marketing. I do some communication. I'm doing design. They're giving skills. They're giving domains. They're giving industries. None of them really tell an identity word. Oh, and they give their job title.
Job title. Yeah, that's what I would have thought. 90%.
They never say, oh, I'm the navigator of ideas. Like, you never hear professional identity words. So we already have an issue. People don't know what professional identity is. That's like square one. Then we have to layer on top of that, how do you become the self-author of your identity? And how do you build that meta-awareness of yourself? And I will say there's a lot of parallels in the meditation community where they say you have to become aware of your own thinking, notice your own thoughts. What are the emotions running through your body? Because you are not those emotions, right? That you are is already an identity phrase. So meditation is great because you're noticing what's going on in your mind. What we need to learn how to do is notice what's going on in our work. Who are we when we do whatever we do? That's the observer of ourselves, stepping outside of ourselves. And that is sophisticated. That is a new level of self-awareness.
And so whether it's meditation, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy, whether it's stoicism, that ability to learn to step back from ourselves to see ourselves and shut off the voice and don't listen to what it tells us we are, that's a step that allows us to get there and see our full selves.
Yes, I don't think people can be a fully realized hybrid professional or understand their hybrid professional identity without a up-leveling of their self-awareness, meta-awareness, and self-belief. Like all of those parts of you have to snap into a higher space. You have to believe you know who you are, that you can see your identity and design the identity that you truly are. Many of us have never been told this was possible. Many of us have never been given permission to do this. Many of us have no idea that this is a thing. Like there's just so many roadblocks that this has not been part of the normal culture. And that's what I'm here to break down.
Part of it for the average of us, I mean, if you look at the way the system's designed, it hasn't really changed for 100 years. Like my son is 13, he's in grade 8. He's reading The Outsiders. I read that book when I was in grade 8 in 1992. I think my dad probably read it when, maybe it's not that old. And I love it. I love The Outsiders and I love the author. I read every book they wrote. But at the same time, it just seems odd that we're 2022 and the book that the kids are reading is The Outsiders. I don't know how much relevance that has to today's world, right? And they go to school X amount of time in the morning to Y amount of time at night. And then they come home, do homework, eat, go to bed, watch Netflix, go to bed. It's almost like we're programmed to not have that self-awareness. We're programmed to not explore ourselves because you raised a good point, being we need society, if you will, a certain blend of singularity, multiplicity, hybridity, because if everyone says, well, wow, I want to be the curator of purposeful experiences, or I want to be the growth guide. Well, we need some people who are just going to show up and do X, Y, Z every day. Otherwise, the world's not going to run. But at some point, we will automate more of what the singularity people do. And I guess this raises a couple questions, right? Because if I think about it, whose job is more likely going to be automated? The singularity or the hybridity? How does AI take over someone who's intersecting 5 disparate things or 3 versus someone who does one thing and one thing only?
You've just crossed like 5 ideas through my mind. This is amazing. First of all, so Burning Glass did a report, actually, I think back in 2019, so it's already getting a little dated, called the Hybrid Jobs Report. And they pretty much said exactly what you just said without knowing it, that hybrid jobs, and in the way they did the study, it was more about like biotech and engineering and more technical kinds of jobs, that the more hybrid they were, like think of a surgeon today. It's not just enough that you can do a really sophisticated kind of surgery. You actually have to learn how to use a robot to do AI-assisted surgery. So that's a hybrid job in the Burning Glass kind of report. And so they were saying those kinds of jobs will pay more and are less likely to be automated. So that was sort of evidence I used a long time ago to just talk about the emergence of hybrid work and hybrid jobs. But a piece of this, right, is like we are always going to need people with deep expertise. If someone just wants to study neuroscience or, astronomy or like any field and become the biggest expert on that thing, that is fine. And that's singularity. And we always need people to collaborate and like find how, like biomimicry, like something in nature that has a great solution for something in a human life. Like that's that intersectionality piece. So innovation is always coming at the intersection of unrelated things. Where I think this gets interesting, and this is a really big point I want to impress, when you say you are a jack of all trades, or when you have multiple professional identities and you're trying to explain the value between them, if you draw a Venn diagram, you become the expert of your own hybridity. Your hybrid expertise is the thing you do that nobody else can do. So that's why a hybrid professional could have 3 degrees that are, years of study in 3 different areas. And then they're combining that and they develop a whole new kind of hybrid expertise that we don't even know what to call. And that suddenly is the unification. It's that marriage where things are inextricable. And you're right, we can't automate that. We don't even know how to hire that. That person has to become the best spokesperson of themselves so we can explain and hear what it is they do. So there's a lot of sides to this coin. It's definitely not an easy topic to just say like, what's going to be automated or what are you going to be in the future? The other thing, sorry, I know I'm rambling a little, but when we were talking about your son, if we thought today, like if we looked at a 6-year-old and said, what job do you want to invent for yourself? Or what career do you want to invent for yourself? Like giving them the permission to invent when they are young and don't even understand how the work world works yet. That's a really different question than what do you want to be, right? It's the permission to design and create. And I meet a lot of college students that are in this bucket because they are saying, Sarabeth, I have a major, I have a minor, I want to invent my own major, I do this, I'm head of this student club. I don't know what that makes me. I don't know how to put myself on a resume and get my first job out of college. They're already starting to play with hybridity in the college years, but nobody on campus has given them permission or inspiration that that's possible. They fight against bureaucracy and red tape. So college students gravitate to my work because it helps them find the linkage between their extracurriculars and, studies in a whole new way. They've never been taught you're allowed to do this. It's literally a permission piece.
And it's interesting because I realized, the more I read it and the more I started to dive into some of the key things, there are certain things that I was already doing without knowing it. So for example, with my kids, if they have a passion, my youngest, he's 10 and he's drawing for like 2 or 3 hours a day. And so you do that every day and quickly you're getting better and better from where he started to where he is. And I talk about him going to school someday and it's saying, hey son, like, yeah, great. I love that you're drawing. You could really pair that up well with this, and this. And it's almost when I write online and I tell people how to succeed in life, I talk about, and you use this, so I'll tie it together to what you say in the book. I say, don't pursue in-demand skills, because in-demand skills are usually a bit more one-dimensional or singularity, and arbitrage will effectively make that in-demand go away. Because it's in demand, more people will go do it, the price will go down. But if you pursue rare skills, and so I called it rare skills, but what you call it is the superpower, which is the intersection of multiple skills. So the way I describe it is, it's great to be an accountant, but if you're that one accountant who's also a writer and is a public speaker and can turn financial statements into a story, now you're rare. And that will always be worth more money. Yes, because it's hard to find people who can do that. And that has a lot of application that companies need. You're making me remember, I did a presentation about a month ago for a consortium of students that they're attending Carnegie Mellon, UPenn, Northwestern, or MIT. And each of those schools have a degree in integrated design management. It's a really esoteric degree. The students gravitate to it. They love it because it's design, engineering, and business all combined. Like who wouldn't want that set? But the students are like, we don't know how to market ourselves when we graduate. People don't get us. People don't understand this degree yet. That degree is on the cutting edge. It's a new frontier. Those students are already training themselves as hybrid professionals, and they felt limited and lost on what to do after they graduate. They loved my presentation because it was the unlock. They're like, oh, this is what we're supposed to do. This is how we navigate the confusion. We talk about the intersectionality as our leverage point. Yeah, it's remarkable. And what was that program called?
Integrated Design Management. There's a couple variations, or Integrated Design Innovation. Like each school has their own little way of saying it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I told the little guy, I said, and I always tell them whatever they do, they should do their MBA after. And so I told him industrial engineering and then you just described exactly what I told the little guy. He's 10, so he's like, I just want to draw manga, leave me alone, Dad, watch some YouTube. But, you plant the seeds when they're young and then they start to say, oh, there is a path to take what I love and turn it into a career. Because sometimes they don't see that, right? Someone might look at drawing and say, well, how will I ever turn that into a path, into a career? And
part of what we're up against is that cognitive dissonance, that disconnect, because The brain wants categorization. There is a reason we have terms for everything in the world: bike, chair, tree. But when you look at the trees, you go, there's 100 or 1,000 different species of trees. So when we are helping new generations think about their professional identity, oh, do you want to be a doctor, lawyer, designer, engineer, manager? Those are still just categories. We have to let them expand to levels of creativity and invention where they're creating their own species of management. Like, there are sound engineers out there. Who would have ever thought engineering and sound go together? Like, things are being combined in new ways. So that's what I would encourage, is the combination of identities and skills that create things that have yet to exist. The future is about work. We don't know what it's going to be.
And how do we use, because one of the things, you're that young person and you're not sure what identities you have or you want to have. And you talk about using your feelings to find your identities. How do we use our feelings to find our identities?
Good homework on that one. So here's where that statement comes from. I was doing my research, this is 10 years ago, trying to understand the intersection of multiple professional identities. Well, as a researcher, I learned the worst research question I can ask someone is, hey, Clint, tell me who you are at the intersection of your multiple professional identities. Because I get a reaction where people go, great, that's a great question. And then they'd scratch their head and roll their eyes and go, I have no idea what you're talking about or how to answer that. So the goal is to figure out the answer to the question, but we can't hit it directly on. So I've learned you have to back into that question by doing a couple things. Instead of saying, who am I at the intersection? You think, what am I doing at the intersection of my multiple professional identities? So go from identity to action, but the action is still fuzzy. So I've learned you think about, when do I feel my best in my work? What are the very specific moments where I come alive? I'm in flow. I can anticipate things. It's effortless. Like, was it a meeting I did? Was it a paper I wrote? What was the time I felt amazing? So the feeling is the thing you tune into first, because when you can isolate that feeling moment, then it's like pressing pause on a movie. You go, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like, literally deconstruct exactly, very detailed, what you are doing in that moment. And then you can extrapolate, what identity would I call myself when I'm doing that thing I just did? Because the new awareness of yourself wakes up in that moment and you start to let go of basic, old, boring language. Oh, I'm being a mentor. Oh, I'm a marketer. Like, that is the very simple, we call it personal blanding of yourself.
Personal blanding. I love that.
Yes. So that's how you go from feelings to actions to identities. And then once you have the identities, you can get to hybridity.
It's so interesting because after you say it, you start to tie it together. And I don't know if you may have been on Clubhouse, or Twitter has their version called Spaces. And over the holidays, me and two other people, we were hosting a space and we were talking about growth and personal growth and helping people with that. And over the course of the night, both my friends went to bed. Another person stepped up and was helping me host. They went to bed. Then another, and I was on that space for 8.5 hours, right? And I, like, in this seat, like, not even in the house. So I didn't have water. I didn't go to the washroom. Like, it was just 8 hours of talking. But that entire 8 hours, I just felt alive. And so the question to myself is, what were you talking about for that 8 hours that made you able to say, it had even been longer, that I can just do this for an entire day because I'm so jazzed. So what's the intersection when I'm there, right? Because that's what's going to tell me that's what's going to tell or give me a sign of my hybridity.
Yes, I'm sure there's a million parts of that 8 hours that would be very fruitful and insightful to unpack for you. And I just want to make a caveat, not exactly what were you talking about, right? Because that's the content, but how were you leading that discussion? How were you being the host? How were you keeping the conversation going? Because I can already tell just from this podcast, the way that you're listening, reflecting, the way you're stringing questions together, like, you have your own style, and not everyone's going to do a podcast the way this is happening right now. So I'm imagining in that 8.5 hour room, you were linking things and making segues and adding, lightness and energy and like just naturally bringing forth those pieces. That's your hybridity in action.
So I'm hearing Ted say something, and then later Tina says something. I say, oh, Tina, you might not have been in the room when Ted said this, but that ties to this. Hey, Ted, can you come back up and answer Tina's question? And Ted's like, hey, how did you remember that I said that at 2 a.m. when it's now 4 a.m, Like, oh, I wrote it down. And
so part of it is like, okay, there's something in your memory. Maybe there's a memory identity word. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but also like the way you're making that introduction, that linkage, you're sort of, are you being funny? Are you being quizzical? Are you being pensive? Like those little nuances, the way you set up the words and ping them in, people think it's just normal. And yet every time I work with people, I go, no, listen to yourself. Listen to the way you said that phrase. That phrase is a phrase you say. I haven't heard that before. And people go, wow.
So it's really, and maybe then I need to do a better job of even listening back to the podcast that I'm hosting to say, hey, how do I talk? What's my pattern? How do I go from question to question, draw linkages? Part of it is also, well, how can I do that better? How can I improve it? What can I change? That's a very good way of looking at it.
Like one phrase that's coming from me right now is a memory igniter. You're doing a really good job of capturing things I said or even wrote in the book and reigniting connections or igniting new connections in the moment. Like not everyone is good at that. Actually, a lot of people are terrible at that. So being a memory igniter might be a part of your hybridity. So you're a growth guide who specializes in memory ignition, so sometimes these words that emerge or these phrases, and what we just did is a great example of why it's good to have a mirror or a collaborator. Those phrases I put in the gold mine, and I mentioned that earlier. They might inspire the hybrid title, or they might inspire the definition of the hybrid title. So we haven't discussed that. But anytime you create these hybrid titles for your hybrid professional identity, they don't really do well standing on their own. They kind of sound a little crazy, honestly. So if I just say, I'm Sarabeth, I'm a creative disruptor, nice to meet you, you're going to go, what the heck is she talking about? Or, hi, I'm Clint, I'm the growth guide. The way they set the brain into motion, this is the neuroscience behind it. Our brains are amped for novelty, right? We love when things stand out and are unexpected, like that fires dopamine in our brain. So, and actually this goes back to the thin slicing question you asked a long time ago. I forgot that one. So when you meet someone for the first time, you make a first impression. And that's what thin slicing is. It's in that first 10 seconds, you've already determined or stereotyped what you think about that person. And a way to counteract that is by starting with a hybrid title. Because if I start with, hi, Clint, nice to meet you. I'm the program director for this thing. You're like, oh, great, program director. And you kind of shut down or it's not quite as engaging. But if I start with, hey, Clint, nice to meet you. I call myself a creative disruptor because, and I go into my elevator pitch, your brain fires because you can't categorize me. You're like, what the heck is a creative disruptor? The brain is like, wait, novelty, shock to the system. But the brain does want to understand. The brain wants to make meaning. So then you have to add the second part of, because I work at the intersection of being an artist, educator, researcher, designer, I give you familiar concepts you can associate with. But then the last part is the definition. What does that mean? Why does it matter that I just told you I'm a creative disruptor who works at the intersection of 4 identities? The last part is the value prop. I work at the intersection because I'm able to radically create new connections between people and ideas to leverage initiatives across organizations, like something like that. And then you sort of have like the finale. And usually because of that 3-part sequence, you're primed, you're inspired, you've got that, sensation of unexpectedness. And most people lean in and are more excited to ask more questions. They're like, oh my gosh, tell me more. I'm so interested. I've never heard of this. That's literally all we desire from a new introduction, whether it's a job interview or a networking event, because it gives you the time to build more rapport, to find more, a relationship between the person you're talking to, as opposed to, being stereotyped and someone going, that's nice, great to meet you. Okay, see you later.
Yeah. Because you're, normally wouldn't even have thought about it, but 90% of the time we're just personally blending ourselves when we introduce ourselves, right? Here's my business card. I'm an accountant.
And you stand out. That's the final part. I'm going to stick in your memory more because you'll be like, I met that creative disruptor lady. Like, you might not know my name, but you might be like, that was such a weird title. Like, but you remember me now.
Yeah, and the odd chance, because it does happen, right? We forget about it, but we're more likely to remember it. Like you're talking to your friend. I always use Ted and Tina. They're my examples. So you're talking to Ted down the road, and Ted says, "Oh, like I need someone who does X, Y, or Z to help me at work." And then you hear that, and you're like, "Oh, that sounds like creative disruption. I actually know a creative disruptor, right?" Whereas if I say growth guide, right? I could just say a life coach. But if someone's talking to someone, they're like, "Oh, growth, like you're talking about growing, like you want a personal growth? I know a growth guide." Like it just gives you that differentiator, to your point, that stands out from the generic.
Exactly. There's just so much fruitfulness in learning how to do this professional identity work, naming yourself, defining yourself, and being clear about who you are. Because once you know this, it becomes clear to other people too. Most people change their introduction every time they meet someone new or they're in a different situation. And that's not necessarily bad. It's part of knowing your audience and being aware of, the context. But you also want to be consistent and you don't want to be boring and bland. So there's a lot of rationale of these techniques are important for today's workforce.
And if you're creating your own personal brand, you more likely than not ought to do your personal identity work to even know, how should I be branding myself? Because I don't know if you go through as in depth or as strong of an exercise when you just go to do personal branding for like a website or for someone who's in the lifestyle space, as an example.
That's exactly right. I have not come across a personal branding expert that does the techniques I do. I mean, I'm literally also inventing another space of professional identity coaching. That is a new thing. You don't look for that yet. And yet it is critical as a tool when you're doing personal branding or when you're doing career development. You've got to work on the identity side. It's more than just what colors do you like or what personality do you have? It really is a sense of knowing you, and then all the writing and copy and content reflects that.
I don't know if you've ever seen Rich Litvin. He's a professional coach, and he has a series of videos where he works with people to uncover their story. And I watch it, and I almost think like, well, it seems like Rich is just repeating back to them what they said, right? But the way he's doing it, now you and I might see that and say that's what it seems like he's doing, but he's doing it in a way where, like, he asked them a series of questions, tell me about your past, tell me about your childhood, tell me about what you're good at, tell me, just question. And then he says, here's what I'm hearing you say. And he gives them like a 2-sentence, this is who you are. This is your title. And like, they're almost always in tears. And I'm thinking, well, you're the one who told them that. But maybe there's that ability to pinpoint, because we don't know the words. We don't know personal identities. And it's not until we sit down and talk with you, Sarabeth, and you say to us after all the questions, this is what I'm hearing you say. And you're like, wow, that's so powerful.
That aha moment you described, I've witnessed many times working with people in a group or individually. And sometimes they are saying the words and all I did was, wait, pause. You just used the word growth guide. Like, can you hear that? And like, there's a slowing down and saying it out loud and putting it in your mouth where then you start to embody it. There's an embodiment moment and you can just see them change and go, oh my gosh. And sometimes it is a word that I came up with and I was like, I'm hearing methodical weaver or something. And I go, oh my gosh. But the minute you hit the word that really expresses somebody's truth, it is life-changing. It just is like you found the missing piece of themselves they've been searching for. Really quick, there's a woman we were working with, this was in a group, and she was like a photojournalist in her past and was adjunct faculty currently and was doing some other like consulting work. And we were struggling. We were close to her hybrid title, but we didn't have it. And that quite often happens. You go back and forth with words. And I was like, I think you're a cultural lens perspective taker, something like that. And that's like too wordy, right? And it doesn't roll off the tongue. There has to be an ease of saying it. And another woman that was in the session, she was thinking about the photography, right? And you take photos and you're shifting lenses. And she's like, what if you're the cultural lens shifter? And it was just the whole group felt it because the lens shifting has all this metaphor and analogy. She's shifting the lens of her students, but also the cultural perspective of the world and the photography. And it just was like ideal and such a perfect fit for her.
Yeah, because even like as soon as you said it, you're like, even just the camera lens, I'm zooming in, zooming out, I'm shifting wow. Yeah, that's a powerful one. So one of the last ones I want to throw at you, or last two. So one of the other people you talked about was Fred. And something that really struck me about the hybridity, because it's something I've noticed with people who may even be emerging hybrids, is you can't train someone to be the kind of hybrid that you are. Can you take us through that and how that even in and of itself is a bit of a differentiator?
Yeah, I'll paraphrase what someone else said to me one time, and we were going through this, and she said, you know how people have spices and they make their special spice blend? Like that's what your hybridity is to you. You are this set of special ingredients. And I've gone through my own artistic training. I've got degrees from 2 art schools, but then a PhD in curriculum. And, I've done projects where I went to Haiti and I worked with the Dalai Lama, like crazy experiences in my background. And all of that is part of my lived experience and my personal path. And that all blends into shaping me. So ultimately, even though I call myself an artist, educator, researcher, and designer as my primary professional identities, anyone else who has those exact ones or even just something very similar, they're not necessarily going to orient in the way that I do. And so that's why the name of your secret blend or secret spice blend is still something you need to create. Like anyone else calling themselves a creative disruptor would not be the same kind that I am. It really has its own flavor because of what I bring to it.
Oh, I love that. So because of the multitude of experiences that go into our lived experience, and I just love the more and more in my life using the concept of lived experience, because it's my favorite way to learn from someone or grow from someone is reading, hearing secondhand, great. But if it's from someone's lived experience, it just resonates so much more. So that I love that. And something I want to leave you with, I'm testing this question for the first time, and I can't believe I hadn't thought of it yet, is you wrote the book more than my title. And almost always when you're writing a book, something has to get cut that you really loved and you didn't want to cut. Was there something that you really wanted in the book that didn't make it that you want to be able to share?
I love this. The book was a bit of an out-of-body experience. Like there's flow states that you hit. And a lot of this book honestly came through me. I reread parts of the book and I go, how did I write that? Like, I don't even know how I put this together. So I don't know if there's a specific part I cut out. Essentially, I just remember getting to the editing stage and feeling like I was getting burned out, and it was 60,000 words was the manuscript. And I had to chop like 10,000 words out. So 1/6 of the book had to go. And that was just painful because it was a rearranging. It was like the whole book had to change shape. Parts that were at the end needed to go in different chapters. Like it was just a reorientation so that it worked again. And in that process, I don't know all the cutting because that was a lot of cutting. And whatever was left out, I think was meant to be left out. Like if I was meant to remember it, it would be there. It would be published somewhere. So that's sort of not a great answer, but I love where you're going with it. I will say at the top of the book, it says part of the Hybrid Professional series. And I never get asked this question and people go, well, where's the series? Like I very clearly feel there are 2 more books at least to come through. And part of it is like, I'm just trying to, find the right timing and work on some of the logistics. But I do believe one book will be about the power of hybrid professionals inside a company. Like what value does a hybrid bring to an organization? Because I get that question a lot on what is the ROI? How do they drive revenue and profit and such? And I think until people have an answer to that, they're going to question the purpose of this whole framework I made. Right now, the hybrid professional identity work resonates with individuals, which is wonderful. It really helps each worker who finds this content to see themselves in it and to realize how they can advocate and move their career forward. But the next step is employers. Employers need to understand the shift in the workforce. And then I do think another book would be about students' pre-professional identity. We sort of hinted at that this really needs to be a body of what they get in their career development and academic advising, and just becomes a known part of going to college and building a pre-professional identity as opposed to being a student. I think the title and the term student is detrimental because everyone calls themselves a student and it's just a placeholder until they know who they are. And once they graduate, they're no longer a student. And a lot of them fall apart because they don't know who they are. They've never been trained how to learn their identity earlier. So those are a couple of thoughts on that.
There's something super powerful about that last one. And so I look at, especially in America with student loan debt, right? And so many of these kids, they're like 17, 18 years old. And we're like, hey, your path to success is to go to college, get $100,000 in debt, don't know what you're going to do going in, finish your degree, not know what you're going to do for work. The ability to get them before that and say, hey, let's talk about what you love. Let's talk about your identity. Let's talk about this, this, and this. And hey, there's multiple paths with that, but here's 4 or 5 that fit you, that you can go do, get your education, and that will lead to something when you're done, whatever that might be. But just priming them in advance of getting all of that student debt, right? Because it seems that by the time they're out of that, it's too late. And no one's getting them before they get there.
Yeah, I mean, they fall apart. I've met many of them. So there's identity transitions are a part of life. And we need to start having more coaches, career guides, growth hackers, whatever you want to call yourself, talk about this. It's not just life coaching, it's identity coaching. And identity is a key part of us understanding who we are and why we're here.
Oh, that's a great way to finish our last question. I love it. And so is there anything that we missed? I mean, we went pretty deep and wide. Is there anything that we missed in our convo?
I mean, I really love the range of where we went because I don't usually get to include so many examples and vignettes. So I think this is a perfect place to end tonight too.
Oh, perfect. And how can people find you?
They can come to morethanmytitle.com. I've got a lot of freebies and a wonderful newsletter with all kinds of tips and stories. And then follow me at More Than My Title on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm very active. So Sarabeth Berk, I'd love to connect with you.
Perfect. So we will have that in the show notes and a link to your book and in the sites that we just mentioned. And thank you for joining me tonight on The Pursuit of Learning. That was a wonderful, enjoyable conversation. Thank you.
I had the best time, Clint. You're amazing at this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining us on The Pursuit of Learning. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and head over to our website, thepursuitoflearning.com, where you will find our show notes, transcripts, and more. If you like what you see, sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, your host in learning, Clint Murphy.